Joining us from Pennsylvania, Republican Senator Pat Toomey. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Enhanced unemployment benefits ran out Saturday. We could be facing a government shutdown midnight Monday night. Senator, you disagree with some of the provisions in this massive funding package. Why should the president sign it?
Well, because you don't get everything you want, even if you're the president of the United States. We have two legislative bodies, and Democrats control one, Republicans the other. Look, if it were just the freestanding government funding bill, I would almost certainly be voting against that. But I think the COVID relief measures are really, really important. And, you know, in my state, as in many other states, we have governors who are closing down businesses again. People are out of work, certainly through no fault of their own. I think we need the extended unemployment benefits. I think we need another round of the PPP loans, which are really grants to small businesses to keep their workforce, part of their business. And time's running out. So I understand the president would like to send bigger checks to everybody. I think what he ought to do is sign this bill and then make the case. Congress can pass another bill. I don't agree with $2,000 checks to people who've had no lost income whatsoever, which is the vast majority of Americans. But the president's free to make that case. Democrats will agree with that and see where it ends up. But we've got a bill right now that his administration helped negotiate. I think we ought to get that done.
Your colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham, has tweeted, after spending some time with President real Donald Trump, today I am convinced he is more determined than ever to increase stimulus payments to $2,000 per person and challenge Section 230 big tech liability protection. Both are reasonable demands. Do you worry we're heading for a government shutdown, sir?
I really don't know. I think the president has not actually explicitly said he's going to veto this bill. I take that as a hopeful sign. I think as he leaves office, he will, I understand he wants to be remembered for advocating for big checks, but the danger is he'll be remembered for chaos and misery and erratic behavior if he allows this to expire. So I think the best thing to do, as I say, sign this and then make the case for subsequent legislation.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is going to hold a floor vote on the $2,000 stimulus item President Trump has requested, putting all House Republicans on the record. How can Republicans vote against more aid when millions of Americans are still unemployed through no fault of their own?
Yeah, because it's terribly untargeted, right? Why would we be sending $2,000 to people with a six-figure income who've had no suspension, no reduction of their income at all? Consider the millions of federal employees. Never missed a check. They're not going to miss a check. Their expenses are probably somewhat diminished. A savings rate went through the roof. Why would we be sending several $1,000s to these folks? This money isn't sitting on a shelf. We're going to print it or we're going to borrow it. And I think that the aid should be much, much more targeted. It should be targeted to people who've actually lost their job, small businesses that are actually in danger of going under. Those are very real categories. The numbers are significant. That's where the aid should go, not to people who've never had any loss of income.
President Trump pardoned some former campaign aides, former GOP congressmen, his son-in-law Jared Kushner's father, former Blackwater security operatives. Your colleague, Senator Ben Sasse, saying, quote, "This is rotten to the core." While the president certainly has the power, do you disagree with how he's using it?
In some cases, I do. I think the case of Mike Flynn, for instance, was completely legitimate to pardon him because the prosecution was an abuse of power. I don't think Michael Flynn ever committed a crime. But some of these other cases, I mean, my goodness, we have tax fraud and bank fraud, witness tampering, obstruction of justice. But because they were close to the president, they got pardoned. This is unfortunately reminiscent of the Mark Rich pardon by President Clinton. It is legal, it is constitutional, but I think it's a misuse of the power.
Some are suggesting it is time to reform presidential pardon powers. Do you agree?
It's a good discussion to have, but it's a tough call. This is obviously a constitutional power, so I don't know how we would do it without amending the Constitution. And I think it would be very challenging.
Do you anticipate a lot more pardons before he leaves office, Senator?
I don't know what to anticipate. This president is often unpredictable.
President Trump continues disputing the outcome of the 2020 presidential contest. Do you have concerns about it hurting Republicans in Georgia, where those critical runoffs will decide the Senate majority?
Well, I think the president should accept the outcome of the election. He had every right to challenge these votes. He had every right to recount and to litigate. He has done all of those things. In my state of Pennsylvania, he's drawn conservative Republican judges who've dismissed these cases for a lack of any credible evidence. In the case of Georgia, I think the reason we're going to win is we have better candidates. I think that's just an objective fact. Better candidates and people who better reflect the wishes of the people of Georgia, and Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, two terrific senators. So I'm still cautiously optimistic about Georgia.
What are the stakes there in Georgia in terms of what's the big difference between a Senate led by Majority Leader Mitch McConnell or perhaps a Majority Leader Chuck Schumer?
Well, the difference is if Republicans hold the Senate, then legislation will necessarily reflect broad compromise because both parties will have some say and neither party will be able to simply run off at will. If Republicans were to lose both Senate races in Georgia, then the Democrats will have complete control of the elected government. And I'm afraid that much of that party has been taken over by this radical woke left and a very liberal agenda, openly advocating socialism, calling themselves socialists, advocating for the elimination of police departments. I mean, just all kinds of crazy policies. And there will be no check on those policies except however they choose to limit themselves, and that's not very reassuring. So I think for the sake of some balance and some consensus government, it's really important that Republicans hold on to the Senate.
Back to the 2020 presidential contest. Front and center is the president's fight. Your state of Pennsylvania, the president's campaign has asked the Supreme Court to throw out 3 state Supreme Court rulings on mail-in ballots and asking that the General Assembly be allowed to pick its own slate of electors. Even if it doesn't overturn the entire election, is that argument valid?
So again, it gets complicated. The Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, sadly, is a rogue court where Democrats have decided to be extremely political and disregard the law. That's a fact. And one of the examples is we have a statute that says in order to be counted, ballots have to arrive by 8 o'clock on Election Day. It's black and white. It's very easy to read. That's what the law says. And then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court came along and said, we'll disregard that and allow votes to be counted for up to 3 days after that. They have no legal authority to do that. It's outrageous. But here's the important point, Mike. It's fewer than 10,000 votes. President Trump lost Pennsylvania by over 80,000 votes. So even though that was a very bad decision, I think it should be overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election, and that's something we have to recognize.
You're not running again in 2022, but what are your concerns looking forward about elections in your home state when at least the president's supporters think this election was a disaster?
Well, I think there are some lessons we should learn. There are some changes we should make. We should overturn these completely illegal Pennsylvania State Supreme Court rules. I, for one, think it's perfectly okay for us to go back to the rules we had before the pandemic, where the vast majority of people voted in person. That served us for, I don't know, over 200 years. It probably still works. If you really can't make it to the polls on Election Day, you can get an absentee ballot. But I think that would make all the sense in the world to go back to that system. It's easier to monitor, it's easier to verify, and people would have more confidence in it.
President Trump waited until the final hour on Wednesday to veto the National Defense Authorization Act, which you voted in favor of. The defense bill affirms 3% pay raises for U.S. troops and authorizes more than $740 billion in military programs and construction. Do you have the votes to override President Trump's veto?
Well, I think we'll find out pretty soon. This legislation has been passed by Congress every year for, I think, about 60 years running. It's been signed by presidents. I think it does put the right priorities behind our defense policy, and it passed both houses with huge, overwhelming votes. But we'll see. That's why you have the vote.
Senator Toomey, thank you. Thanks for joining us this Christmas holiday weekend. I'll see you back on the Hill.